Hi everyone, and welcome to The Climate of Sport with me, Claire Poole, the podcast where we explore how the world of sport can drive climate action, champion equality and shape a more sustainable future. From the boardroom to the locker room, from grassroots to global stages, the game is changing and so are we. Let's get into it. Hi everyone, welcome back. Great to be with you this week and the week that David Attenborough turns 100. Sir David Attenborough, excuse me. Happy birthday to David Attenborough. I looked into this because, of course, David Attenborough is an icon of the natural world, environmentalist extraordinaire, the godfather of environmentalism, etc. So, of course, I'm trying to find a sport angle. Now, it was his brother, Lord Richard Attenborough, who was the lifelong Chelsea Football Club fan. So David Attenborough is not such a huge sports fan. However, of course, I was able to find a link. For those of you who don't know, or those of you who've forgotten, Attenborough was a hugely influential television controller for the BBC back in the 60s, and he helped save Match of the Day when there was a changeover of management at the BBC, which is still going today. And apparently he was also the one who was responsible for bringing yellow tennis balls to Wimbledon to improve visibility when colour TV began. So yes, Sir David Attenborough is also a sport and climate icon for us. Sidebar, I shook his hand at a launch event for COP26, which was on the 4th of February 2020. I remember it distinctly. And I'm sure many people listening to this may have met Sir David Attenborough and maybe even been at events with him or spoken to him or maybe are friends with him. Me shaking his hand 6 years ago was such a highlight at that launch event of COP. So always thinking about that, and huge happy birthday to an absolute icon turning 100 this week. Also last week, we hosted a national emergency briefing sports screening, which was really well received. For those of you who are outside of the UK, this is a group of people here in the UK who are pushing our government to do a COVID-style emergency briefing about the climate and nature crisis. They've done an incredible job of bringing together experts on all different facets of the climate crisis, from national security to food security, water, the economy, food, etc. And it's an incredible briefing, which they've turned into a short film as well, kind of Gogglebox style of people watching the film and reacting. It's really, really fantastic. And we did a screening for people within sport last week. For those of you in the UK who didn't join us, there's loads of community screenings up and down the country. For those of you outside of the UK, we'll put a link in the show notes. Have a look and encourage something similar happening in your country, because it's absolutely brilliant. And lastly, shout out to everyone who's at the Green Sports Alliance Summit in Cleveland this week. We wish we were there. We are excited to hear everything that you've learned and what progress has happened there this week. So hopefully we'll be able to share some of those insights on the pod next week. Okay, straight to our climate hat trick. The first story is running hot and cold, when runfluence hype meets a warming world. And this story is influenced by a piece in The Conversation by Caitlin Feltu-McInnes and Maddie Orr. Why can't you trust runfluencers? Are runfluencers ruining running? Try saying that after a few pints. These were just a couple of results that popped up when I searched the word runfluencer on the internet after reading this piece that I mentioned in The Conversation. And the backlash is real from runfluencers. So what's the issue? Basically, runfluencers are seen to promote overtraining, unrealistic lifestyles, and getting access to races that many people can't. And it's changing the face of running. What probably used to be one of the most simple sports, lace up and head out, is becoming very commercial, performative, and weirdly out of reach for some people. And it's not just about the influencers, to be honest. It's not just about them and what they're doing or what they're saying. It's also about what they're promoting and selling. So they are selling more gear, more optimization, and that means more consumption. In a sport where you basically needed next to nothing to be involved with, there is a climate cost to this. So this running culture, this runfluencer culture, is pushing us to do more at the exact same time as the world is making it harder to do so. Of course, we know climate change can mean hotter or more humid conditions, lower air quality, and increased risk. So running's supposed to be the most accessible sport. Climate change is making it less so. But where you live really matters with this as well, because some people are running on rural routes or lovely leafy neighborhoods, lots of tree-lined streets, shaded areas, and they have much higher air quality. This is much safer than others who are more exposed, are running in more polluted areas, perhaps in urban environments that don't have that kind of shade cover, are much more built up, have the urban heat island effect, and become dangerous in these conditions. This means running isn't just about fitness anymore, or even that optimization that's being pushed, but it's about infrastructure inequality and also the environment as well. And this, of course, is the irony at the exact moment that running is getting more difficult depending on the conditions due to the climate crisis. This runfluencer culture is about driving overconsumption, which is making the problem worse. So when you've got, more shoes, more kit, more upgrades, more tech, all of that means more emissions. And this influencer marketing is also bringing trends, constant upgrades, and that means items are generally replaced quicker than we actually need. That, of course, creates more waste and then restarts that emissions cycle over and over again. So a push-pull of different things at play here. Influencer culture, overconsumption, an increasingly difficult environment depending on where you live. So what are the outcomes of this, or what should we be thinking about? Really, what we want to do is run smart, keep running. It's brilliant for our physical and mental health, but check conditions. And maybe when you're served that new tech, those new shoes, that new equipment, ask yourself, do I actually need this? And make decisions accordingly. We also have a bonus around this running trends. We mapped out how the 2026 marathons have met climate reality. Link in the show notes. Check that out and let us know what you think. Story 2 is from baseline to breakpoint. Can tennis courts tackle carbon? I wasn't accidentally leafing through the Applied Geochemistry journal, but I did find this through the internet. So no, I'm not a subscriber, but I'm delighted to find research like this coming through. So what's it all about? Essentially, researchers are looking at green clay tennis courts and asking the question, how much carbon are they pulling out of the air? Green clay is mainly used in the US and it makes up the entire court, so both at a surface level and below the ground as well. This is different to the red clay that's popular in other locations because this green clay is made of, let me get this right, crushed Blue Ridge Meta basalt, which is BRMB, and this is found in the Blue Mountains in Virginia. The mechanism used through this court, which we're looking at the carbon extraction from, is called enhanced rock weathering. So this is when rainwater reacts with the rock and atmospheric CO2, locking that carbon away over time. So the researchers of this article looked at 2,834 court facility locations and found that green clay courts in the US sequester more than 25,000 tons of CO2 per year. 80% of green clay courts generate these net negative emissions within 10 years of being installed. We love seeing this cross-disciplinary thinking because where sports surfaces or infrastructure double as climate infrastructure, it's great to understand how something's going beyond just infrastructure itself and actually is becoming a climate solution. And it's great to get this data on the courts that already exist out there. Is it the silver bullet we've been after? Of course, it's never as simple as that, is it? So transportation distance from the singular Blue Ridge Metabasalt processing site is going to be the primary source of emissions for most tennis courts. They've compared it to hard courts in terms of carbon. But of course, there are other environmental factors we need to think about for these green clay courts as well. When you look at the brand that mainly sells them, they recommend they're watered twice a day, once overnight and once in the middle of the day as well, which of course raises environmental questions, especially for water-stressed regions. Not questions that are insurmountable. This could be countered by areas that have rainwater harvesting or collection or use recycled water, but still an environmental overlay, let's say, in addition to just the carbon sequestering that we're talking about. But what we love about the idea here is that data is being surfaced to show the benefits of how places we build and how the places we build and play on go beyond infrastructure and contribute to climate solutions in some way. Not every single court is going to be a climate sink, but for tennis courts that already have these green clay there, now you might realize that you're sequestering more carbon than you had previously thought. So go team on that if you've got a green clay court or are considering one. Story 3 is the World Cup travel crunch. Bad for business, but better for the planet. Okay, a new report from the American Hotel and Lodging Association has just dropped. Again, is this a report you're used to reading? Probably not, but they've got a new report out, which is the US Hotel Outlook for the FIFA World Cup 2026. And this suggests that the hospitality boom that US hoteliers might have been expecting is not landing yet. 80% of the respondents say hotel bookings are tracking below forecasts, some by a little, some by a lot. And 65 to 70% say that visa barriers, broader geopolitical concerns are significantly suppressing international demand. Hotels are facing fragmented demand, and this is leading to ongoing uncertainty. Some are recalibrating their strategies or pausing investments in World Cup specific activations, brand partnerships, and temporary renovations that they had planned to support the international travelers staying at their hotels. The reason for all of this: rising fuel costs, expensive transportation for games that we've heard a lot about, geopolitical uncertainty, as I said, and visa barriers as well. These are some of the reasons behind the underwhelming forecast. The result of this as well is a lower than expected forecast of international travellers. The report says forecasts show that domestic travellers are outpacing international travellers, an imbalance that threatens broader economic impact of the World Cup that the World Cup was expected to generate. So the reason for this: international travel is absolutely critical for success of the World Cup. Those international World Cup visitors spend more money and they stay longer than domestic travellers. The report says international travellers are expected to spend $5,048 per person, about 1.7 times more than typical international visitors to the US. A third of them will also stay longer for 2 weeks, and they'll travel to multiple cities. And that, of course, broadly is really good for the economies. Domestic World Cup travellers still spend about £4,794 per person, which is only $250 less than the international travellers, but they cluster around matches. They have shorter game-focused itineraries, so you haven't got that broader economic win. A potential unintended consequence of this trend is something we've been talking about in the climate conversation around mega sports events for as long as I can remember. The biggest emissions from mega sports events come from fan travel. So this unintended consequence from the geopolitical landscape of reduced international travellers, a trend that we're seeing so far, will reduce emissions from transport. Multiply that across thousands of fans and the impact can be really significant. We don't know what the magnitude is. If someone can do that data and research, please do and let us know, because I'd love to put some numbers against this. But it's very difficult to say in this conversation because obviously the FIFA Men's World Cup is taking place over such a large geographic area that what's considered as a domestic traveller in the US, say someone going from Los Angeles to New York for a game, is still nearly 4,000 kilometres. So, of course, international travellers will be coming further than that. But what the difference is, we can't be exactly sure. It might be smaller than we think compared to other tournaments, but probably will still end up being pretty substantial. With 2 months to go, this trend could, of course, still shift. But if it holds, it points to something bigger. The same factors that are slowing global travel, the cost, the geopolitics, the friction, the visas, may also quietly be reducing the climate impact of the FIFA Men's World Cup 2026. What's bad for the economy might actually end up being better for the planet. So let's watch this space and see how that pans out. Okay, those are our 3 climate hat trick stories for this week. Again, they are running hot and cold. Runfluencer hype is meeting a warming world. Story 2, from baseline to breakpoint, is your local tennis court eating carbon? Story 3, the World Cup travel crunch. Bad for business, but good for the planet. Okay, that's it from me for this week on the Climate of Sport podcast. But an extra addition for you this week. I caught up with Kate Williams, CEO of 1% for the Planet recently, and you're going to hear from me now chatting to her. We spoke about so many different elements, from leadership to raising money through their organization. They're nearly at $1 billion now in terms of money raised, and over 100 sports organizations are already collaborating with 1% for the Planet. A great chat. Let me know what you think. So welcome to the Climate of Sport podcast. Kate, first of all, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes. So my name's Kate Williams. I'm CEO of 1% for the Planet, and I'm so excited to get to talk about sports as it relates to climate because basically that's my life.
Yeah.
I think I'm like sort of reclaiming my identity as an athlete, which will be fun to talk about. And then basically all of the metaphors that I use for everything I do are sports related. So
Love it.
it's perfect.
I love it. Tell me what you mean by reclaiming your life as an athlete. That sounds exceptional.
I know, big.
Yeah.
I was an athlete my whole life in different ways. And then about 4 years ago, I had a knee injury and tore my meniscus. Nothing dramatic. I think it was probably chronic and I was not paying close attention. And then I was shoveling snow. And just did one heavy load and felt it. And so very painful, needed surgery. And again, like no big sob story. This happens to a gazillion people and many people have so much worse, but it completely stopped me in my tracks, which was sufficiently intense for me.
Yeah.
And took a while to get back. I had to have surgery, got delayed, had like an okay recovery and then a like backslide. And so really just had to sort of go through the whole thing of like, am I okay not being an athlete anymore? And the kind of pivotal moment was when my PT, who I had really liked until this moment, said, Kate, you're in your late 50s. You can why don't you just like focus on going for walks?
No.
I was like, no, that is so I completely don't accept that, which was actually maybe the perfect thing for her to say because it made me so mad.
Yeah.
That I was like, okay, we're done. And I went immediately and signed up for a gym. And I was like, I'm just going to have a personal trainer. You get a free session when you sign up for this gym. And he's like, you're going to be fine. We're going to get you strong. I learned so much about being an older woman in menopause, getting my muscles. So I feel like I had this beautiful opportunity to not just go back to what I was able to like let go and then rebuild. And so now I get to be an athlete at my age and it's awesome.
I love it. The evolution of your athletic journey. It reminds me when I had a back injury a few years ago, a physio said, maybe you're just not going to run anymore. And I was like, nope, I will find a new physio who doesn't give me that answer. And I did. And I have run ever since. So yeah, no shade to the physios and PTs who think they're giving you good advice. But when the advice doesn't fit, we press on.
Yes, exactly.
I love it. So what I want to hear, obviously the Climate of Sport podcast is all about the intersection of climate, environment, sustainability and sport. So first of all, I want to hear from you. You alluded to it a little bit about the way sport influences your leadership and your way of life. So I'd love to hear that. And you wrote a LinkedIn post a little while ago about mile 16 of a marathon, kind of the way that hits, or midpoint in a skiing race, which you do as well. So how does sport manifest to you in terms of the kind of leadership work?
Yeah, so many ways. For the first part of my life, I was a team sport athlete. And so that is a chunk that really influences, I think, how I lead other people. And then I think being more of an individual sport athlete now in running and Nordic skiing, that influences how I comport myself and think about my own journey. So in terms of team sports, I was a lacrosse player through most of college and, played at a pretty high level. And really some of what stuck with me from that is to be a good player, you throw the ball to where someone is going, so you're meeting them there. And that interesting concept when you apply that to how you manage people, manage them for what they can become, not locking them into where they are. And just thinking about sort of the team interactions that everyone needs to play their role. So the metaphors abound. And one of the things that I've started trying to do more just recently, actually, I don't know really why I wasn't doing it earlier, but is like that was in my head for a lot of how I was thinking about it, but starting to say it out loud more.
Yeah.
And so, sharing that metaphor and the idea of like throwing the ball where someone's going, not where they are, because that's the only way it's successful. That has become something that few people on my team would recognize.
Yeah.
And in terms of individual sport, I mean, there's so much to say there, but like that mile 16 post that I wrote was just like everything gets hard. And certainly working on the climate challenge, there's not a sort of easy end in sight. You can feel like you've worked so hard and you've done really good work. It's all been the right things to do, but still there's a lot left. And those moments when you inevitably, I think it's inevitable, you have to sort of acknowledge this is hard. I don't know if I can go on. And So for me, having like the muscle memory of like, well, actually you can,
Yeah.
but you need to sort of figure out what your strategies are to stay fueled, to get the support you need, all of those kinds of things.
I love it. I love that analogy, especially with us being in marathon season right now. I'm seeing a lot of inspirational Instagram posts like you have to hit the wall to see what's on the other side of it and this and that. I love that analogy with fuel, support, what rallies you in the climate fight, because it's a marathon, but it's a never ending marathon. Like we're never going to be done, are we? We're never going to be like, tick, on to the next thing.
Yeah.
This is a life's work for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the things I've been thinking about lately is because I have set the goal of running a marathon again, which is very exciting because I just, that went through that period of like, I'm not sure I'll run again. And so I'm excited about that. And one of the things I've realized is like, I can tend to get kind of serious about sport. But when I look back, the times that I loved it the most, was in flow state the most, was when it was just fun.
Yeah.
And, I look back on lacrosse, especially because that was the sport that I really kind of got to the highest level in. And I stopped when I stopped loving it because I realized as an athlete at college, I was playing Division I and I was just kind of getting beat up. I was like bruised all the time. And I'm not a big person, but I'm fast. And that served me well until that point. And then again, I just started getting like smushed between much bigger people. And so I realized I'm not having fun anymore. And that's, the point of sport is to learn so much and gain the opportunity to become more competent and to master the different skills.
Yeah.
But at a certain point too, like you got to enjoy it. And so I think about that when I apply it to things like climate, where we can get very, very serious and we need to. But I think our best energy, I think it's proven, like if you bring joy, if you bring hope, if you bring the perspective that you can do it, that's the only way that you're going to get from mile 16 to, the end of the marathon or the ultra marathon. And that's something I'm trying to bring to it, is just how fortunate we are to get to run marathons, how fortunate we are to get to do work to create a better future. And yes, it's serious. And yes, we have to act with urgency, but we can also have fun and support each other and make it, make the work lighter.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I 100% on that, because it is critical work, and the majority of people who work in sustainability and climate are working a huge amount of hours doing a lot of stuff beyond their job description, especially in sport. Like a lot of sports organizations, they're not even doing sustainability full time. They're also doing facilities or comms or legal or HR. It's part of an overarching role. And to that point, it's not to be glib about the climate crisis, but also you're never going to have that longevity if everything's really serious all the time. It's not about making fun of it. It's about having fun to keep going, I guess.
Exactly. And also I think about like, what are we doing it for?
Yeah.
We're doing it for future generations, but we're also doing it as work that's meaningful. And so today is a day that, 10 years ago when I was doing this work, when I would look ahead and say in 10 years, I wasn't saying, I hope I'm like really serious, head down, feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. I was thinking, I hope that I've made progress. I hope I have learned. I hope I have contributed. And I hope I'm having like great conversations with amazing people that this work has brought me to. And so I think bringing that kind of gratitude and joy to each day is a part of how we kind of pay homage to the work we've done before and set ourselves up again for better outcomes ahead. Because truly, I think if you don't have that, you'll stop. You can't keep going if it's always hard, always sad, always discouraging.
Absolutely. So we're going to hear more about 1% for the planet soon. But before we get into that, I want to share with you a couple of facts, and I'd love your insights on it. Okay, so Forbes research report said at the end of last year, 67% of C-suite executives now rank sustainability among their top 3 strategic priorities. But at the same time, only 3% of all charitable giving goes to environmental causes, highlighting the gap, which we talk about a lot, between intention and action. So why do you think there is such a discrepancy between the seriousness in which C-suites are taking it, but then how it's actually being activated? This example of 3% of charitable giving is an example that brings it into relief. But also I think we know from a gut perspective globally that the intention or commitments that are announced and then the action that sometimes follows are not always in keeping. So what do you think are the big challenges or opportunities within that?
Yeah. And another fact to throw in the mix is that only 5% of corporate philanthropy goes to the environment. So I think that's, kind of on the point of what you're asking about. And I think there's a bunch of different factors and they vary over time. But I think one is a little bit of what we were just talking about, the kind of mile 16 effect is it's, working on climate, working on environmental issues generally. There's some that are simpler, but most of them are pretty complex and you're not going to get results in a year. You're not going to get an easy impact report. And so I think it's hard to invest in things that are long and complex, particularly when you're in a business where you are most likely held to, quarterly earnings reports and things like that, and that desire for results in the short term. So I think there's kind of a mismatch between when impact can be reported, which I think is challenging for business leaders. I was just having an interesting conversation last night. I was at Cambridge and we're sort of in the work. This has been going on for a while and there's some discouragement that we're still facing the same challenges. So, people set targets for 2030 and now in many of those cases, we're not on track to hit those. And so it's very easy to then say, well, that was, people are backing off on their commitments. And so people, get called out for that. And sometimes that's absolutely merited. I think that, there are ways in which people are backing off on pledges, which is unacceptable in my mind. There's also learning that we didn't know as much as we know now. And some of those targets that we set were probably not possible without driving the business out of business. And so I think all of that creates a really complex environment to make decisions. It doesn't get anyone off the hook. No, in my book, to be clear, but I think it is complex. And I do think, that's a piece of it. I think what businesses need to do is do something. And for me, that's the most important thing. And for 1% for the planet, that's our framework is, yes, it's complex and it can be easy to get scared off of making big commitments or sort of wading into that complexity and not knowing what's going to happen. And so people get small and get paralyzed. And we've all had moments like that, I think, in our lives or whatever. So I have some understanding for that, but I also think it's unacceptable to say, I can't do that, so I'm going to do nothing, because there's actually a very legit in-between steps. And what we see across our community of businesses is that they take action, and by being in the game of taking the simple action of giving their 1%, they then have new conversations, new perspectives. They learn from the nonprofit partners they're engaged with. They learn from the other businesses. And, 5 years down the road, wow, they're accomplishing a lot. They're doing more. They've learned more. They've been able to, add to their portfolio of activities, and they're making progress.
Nice. I love that. And I think just for our sport listeners as well, I think that'll really resonate with them, because I know, sports organizations that maybe are now getting investment from VCs and other, they've become an asset and then they have to perform. So again, that becomes much more rigid, which we're seeing an uptick of. And equally for some sports where they face promotional relegation, that longer term commitment, we hear from those organizations of we're doing pretty well now, but if we get relegated next season, that financial landscape dramatically changes and we can't be tied into something long term. So I think what you've said will really resonate with them. It seems like a perfect time now then to hear more about 1% for the planet. I think a lot of people will know about it, but for those who don't, just give us a short insight, a top level of what the organization is, what it does, who you work with, and how long you've been about.
Yeah, so we're a global movement builder and a certifying entity. And the way that all comes to pass is that we engage businesses to give 1% of their revenues or turnover to environmental partners. And we don't act as a foundation. We don't take those funds in and distribute them. We facilitate partnerships directly between those businesses and the environmental partners that we vet against our eligibility criteria. And then at the end of each year, so every single year, every single member is completing that giving against their 1%, and we're certifying that it's happening. And when I say giving, it can actually be a portfolio of different ways in which that happens, which is actually a really powerful part of our model and enables both the nonprofit partners to receive the value that means the most to them. And it also gives our members, our businesses, a lot of flexibility. So businesses can give cash, always good.
Lovely.
They can give in-kind products or services. So think professional services company that helps a nonprofit design a website. So that's hugely valuable. It's cash that nonprofit did not have to spend. And they also get a aligned partner to help them with a really big project. There's also, products that are donated, but the nonprofit always gets to determine, like, is this a service or a product that I want? There's no dumping ground going on. We make sure of that. And then all of that every year rolls up into our total impact that we report. And we talk about it in terms of certified dollars, US dollars. We're in, just to give you a few stats, we're in about 110 different countries. We have companies across 65 different sectors, so professional services, sports, apparel. We can talk more about that.
Yeah.
And last year, it was our biggest year. We certified 150 million US dollars. And that brings us to a lifetime total of 846 million US dollars, which is getting close to $1 billion.
Yes.
Which is a big target that we've been really kind of galvanizing our community. I mentioned movement building. We're really like, this is a movement effort. And so we'll have a big high five and celebration on our 25th anniversary, which is also next year when we get to $1 billion. And then pretty quickly, the game will continue and we'll be working to get to that next billion faster.
Wow. $1 billion.
I know.
That's huge. So the organization's 25 years next year, and I think you've been there 12 years in different roles?
Correct.
Tell us about your journey as well and kind of what you've seen in that time. A lot of people have been asking me recently of like, the last couple of years, how have things shifted? What are you seeing? You've got that oversight from the organization perspective and seeing this across all those organizations over a decade, nearly half the time the organization's been around. So tell us about what you've seen in that time.
Yeah, it's been interesting. I've been CEO for 11 of those 12 years. I started as the director of partnerships and then had an interesting year where the CEO left and I became CEO. So it's really most of my time has been in that role. But we've seen a lot of growth. It's been an exciting time, kind of broad strokes. We were certifying about 18 million US dollars that in 2015. And then, as I mentioned, last year we certified 150 million. So that's pretty much a 10x increase in impact. And that's the most important form of growth. We've had to grow our staff to, keep up with that. Our impact growth has outpaced our staff growth, which is exactly how we want it. We really are kind of always looking at that leverage, like what's our investment in the work that we do relative to the impact that we're able to drive. And like huge credit to my amazing staff for just being such good systems thinkers and systems builders. And I think trends outside of just our growth that have influenced that, we have seen a rise in consumer interest in allocating their purchasing dollars to companies that they believe in. And, people are price sensitive, and most of us have to be. But for most of us too, we're not big philanthropists or not big investors, and our purchasing dollars are the way that we get to kind of align our money with our values. And so I do think being able to have companies who are saying, yeah, we're credibly doing something and we're third-party certified for doing that really means a lot, because then consumers can have confidence that they can make choices that they can trust.
Yeah. Do you see often, poor Gen Z, they get it in the ear a lot, but do you see that shift of that 10x growth and the consumers demanding it? Do you have data or information that shows that Gen Z are partly responsible for that? Does that feed into that at all? Or is it not that sort of granular?
We do a brand awareness survey, and I don't have that specific answer off the top of my head, but I do think that, we see across different demographic groups, like millennials have been the kind of engine room for a lot of this consumer interest. But I do think, in different countries, we do see some different breakdown. Like one interesting thing is that households with children have had the highest purchase intent for 1% for the Planet products and services. So we can pull out things like that, but I don't have those all.
No, that's good. The reason I ask is because in a previous interview I did for the podcast, one of our recent episodes was a breakdown of the FIFA Men's World Cup this summer and fan groups that are particularly attuned to environmental or social activity. And Dr. Jonathan Casper from NC State University flagged that Gen Z and female football fans are where we see the expectation that, for example, sports organisations take this activity under their sort of wing and that there's kind of that expectation. So I'm always looking for is there other examples? But that's another interesting stat, I think, or insight for us to think about in sport around families that are involved. And perhaps if you're seeing that from a business perspective, that family involvement, that could be something that maybe sports organisations haven't thought about yet. But I wonder if they could then start looking at their own surveys and see if some of those behaviours or interests or their interest in sustainability, environment, climate happens to coincide with being part of a family unit as well. I just think it's always really interesting to think like who is driving this change, what is happening. So definitely not to put you under pressure for stats. And what's that saying about like just because it shows it doesn't mean that's really true. Like you can pull out, I guess, something of anything you want to see. But that's fascinating. So really, really interesting about that. And I know from your colleagues who told me in advance now you have over 100 sport organisations who are signed up to 1% for the planet. And that includes sports centres, athlete talents agencies, sport apparel companies. And obviously, the conversation we're having today is to make sure the listeners to our podcast know about 1% for the planet. And already I've learned something about the engagement because I presumed it was all revenue, but that value in kind is really, really cool to know about. So I guess for the listeners, do you have insights from sport organisations about why it really resonates, why it appeals, what they get from it? There is a lot of different ways you can do this. So from those sports organisations, what do you hear that really resonates for them about why this is an exciting way to engage?
Yeah, and we have some awesome UK sports companies. Dry Robe has joined.
Nice.
Amazing.
Yeah.
We love them. And they're a newer member, and we're so excited to learn more with them about sort of how they bring it to life. But so they're one example, and actually I can, reflect on, a connection that I think that gets to the heart of your question. Yeah. But just to mention a couple of other amazing members, Route One, which is a skateboarding company only, which is an agency that represents sport companies, and then Flow Kayaks. So just in those four, that gives a sense of like the diversity of sport. So I think that's an important thing to think about too, is sport is such a beautifully diverse way for people to engage with business, with, activity, with each other. So, but like thinking about Dry Robe, so they have created, these amazing robes, changing robes for people who are doing something that puts them in direct contact with the natural world. And I think for a lot of sports companies and just sports themselves, like thinking about what you were saying about Gen Z women fans and families with kids who play sports, like the activity of sport is often a way that people are getting closer in touch with their bodies, which are natural systems and which are part of the natural world. Often in the outdoors, again, like Dry Robe, Flow Kayaks, like that is people deliberately seeking experiences that, sort of put their bodies in relationship with nature. And so I do think that creates amazing opportunities for that nonprofit connection to reinforce. And again, we're so excited to work with Dry Robe and see how they decide to lay out their strategy. But I think so many opportunities there. One thing, too, that just came to mind when you were talking about the fan element and also just sport participants, athletes, is I think the psychology of sports is also an interesting one as it relates to, making commitments to things that we care about, because almost all sports and almost all athletes require like repeated practice and entail days that are really hard and that you hate it.
Yeah.
And then like high moments, low moments, like injuries, comebacks, sort of incredible relationships. All of that is part of the sport experience. And I think that is such helpful like training and again, like, metaphor or practice for what it takes to make commitments for the planet, and can often be that sort of touchstone that enables us to stay the course, kind of back to what we were talking about earlier, and to, find joy in the practice of showing up every day.
Yeah, I love that. That's interesting. So you've given us some great examples there. Is there any like really cool, interesting, fun? I mean, you've kind of sort of covered some, but is there a random story with a sports organization that signed up to 1% for the planet, or what they've achieved with you, or kind of a standout, I guess, in any innovative way, and not innovation in terms of technological innovation, but just a way of thinking about things or their engagement? Is there a story that sticks out in your mind?
Absolutely. It's so fun because usually, people ask me, what's your favorite organization? I'm like, oh, I can't have favorites.
Yeah.
But in this case, I do.
Yay!
Because our headquarters is based in Vermont, which is a tiny little state of 650,000 people in the Northeast. Like we're just south of the Canada border. but we have a football club.
Okay.
And Vermont Green FC joined as a 1% for the Planet member when they were incorporated just 3 or 4 years ago. And they have just like won all of our hearts. And by all of our, I don't just mean 1% for the planet, like the city of Burlington, which saying it's a city when I'm sitting here in London is like an overstatement. But it's just the most amazing story. And they have embedded climate and social justice in their DNA. So they play on the University of Vermont field. And for all of their games, they have a big sign. I'm sure there's a word for this kind of sign, the one on the sides of the field, whatever those are
Like
called.
the hoardings
Yeah.
around the edge of a pitch.
Exactly.
Yes.
And it's every single game, biggest letters, climate justice is social justice. And the team, they have great support and they're winning and they're communicating a powerful story. And last year we had an event and the owners came and they had just won the league. And, they're not in the majors, but they are crushing it. And I think their whole ethos embodies everything we're talking about here. So
shout out.
Big shout
out.
Home team.
Big shout out. I love it. That's amazing to hear. I think they're a very cool team. And actually, I think it's a great reminder as well that it's not always necessarily the huge globally recognized football clubs, even though they are doing amazing things as well. Like sometimes these, more community based and they're synonymous with that place and organization. That's a really, really cool example. So thank you for that. We always ask our podcast guests just broadly. It doesn't have to be about sport or the planet. It can be more broadly, but it's always nice to hear from people, leaders like yourself. Is there a piece of advice? Is there something someone told you once that stuck with you, the way you live your life? Kind of more a philosophical question, I guess. If you're giving advice to people like Kate Williams, like, I want your career, like, what's the best advice you'd give me? Or is there something like that, like a mantra or an inspirational point that you would share with our listeners? Because I think whilst we talk specifically about climate change and sport, we're all just human beings trying to press on and have purpose and do the best. So if you've got some advice or a nugget that you can share with our listeners, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah. It was fun to think about this. And I didn't have to think very long.
Yes.
It is very much with me. I had a board chair in the last job that I had. I was executive director of another small nonprofit based in Vermont. And he said, Kate, the key is to be all in. And we had a great conversation about that because in that moment, I actually was not showing up as all in. I was sort of leaning towards transitioning out. And he had the wisdom to sort of observe that. And he wasn't, scolding me for not being all in, but he really helped me to understand that if you're not all in, you need to pay attention to that. Because if you're doing something for yourself and for that thing, for those people, for the whatever it is that you're part of, you owe them you're all in, and you owe yourself you're all in. And that doesn't mean you can be all in all the time, but to notice when you're not and to either take the steps you need to kind of get back to all in. And that might mean changing. Sometimes it just means noticing. And so I think for me, the key is just really focusing on how can you be all in as much as possible in what you're doing.
That is amazing. I love that. And I think always connecting it back to our work, I think the people who work in sustainability, ESG, CSR, however it manifests in sport, tend to be those all-in people. So it's a good reminder as well, if someone's listening to this and they don't feel all in, to think about that and reflect on that and wonder why. So an amazing piece of advice. Thank you, Kate. That's so kind.
One of our core values that we really lean into is that we're stronger together. And, I mentioned that we're a movement.
Yeah.
And, we really think about that because the individual actions of our businesses and every single one of them, every single year. So this is not a pledge. This is a certified action that our companies are doing. Those are powerful in and of themselves. But the whole point of our founding was that it doesn't matter or it's not sufficient to go it alone. The point is to, aggregate this collective and to really create this movement such that, ultimately we'd love to see every business everywhere engaged. And the value that drives that is that we're stronger together. And so like we talked about the 1 billion in lifetime certified impact that we're close to. And what's really amazing about that number is, a lot of philanthropy is a few people with a lot of resources making very big donations, and those matter a lot. And the world is mostly not those people. And so our billion, soon to be billion, is made up of literally thousands of tens of thousands of businesses, nonprofits in partnership, some donations as small as $100, other ones that are bigger, but hundreds of thousands of donations over the years through all these distributed relationships and decisions.
Yeah.
And so it's just a stronger together relationship, which I think is so much of what we often learn through sport is that you don't win the game because one person always scores the goals. You win the game because there are assists or because you get in the right positions and work together as a team. So I just think stronger together is such a core value in both work and sport.
Yeah, I love that. And that as well, I think is really helpful for people in sport to hear about as well, because I think often one of the big things we try and do through the likes of UN Sports for Climate Action Framework is to highlight that whilst you may make organisational goals, you may wish to connect with your fans, actually, there's hundreds or thousands of organisations like yours that you can share learnings with, that you can connect with, that if you come together, locally there might be a football club, a rugby club, a tennis club, a cricket club, an athletics ground, all really embedded in a community. And how much more could you do if you got outside your silo and went into that? So that really leans into that idea as well, I think, of that coming to stronger together inside and within our fan base and within our participants, but also as a sports community more globally as well. So that's very cool.
Yeah. And one thing that makes me think of is we haven't, interestingly, talked about competition.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is, a part of sport. And I do think at our best as athletes, and people working on these things, we celebrate the competition that pushes us to be better. We don't, have a we're going to crush them. I mean, maybe we have a little bit of that for fun, but really what competition does for us is it pushes us to get better and sharper and smarter. And so, I think, being able to sort of see that as a pathway to doing better work as opposed to an annoyance or an obstacle is the opportunity.
Absolutely. It really stands out for me. Years ago, we do something called Sport Positive Leagues, where we rank football clubs based on their environmental sustainability metrics and put it into a league table. We've done that for years, and we actually launched with J League in Japan this year. So all 60 professional Japanese football clubs now are doing our Sport Positive Leagues. It's very cool. And I was interviewed about this probably 5 years ago. And this journalist said to me, isn't climate change too important to compete about? It's about collaboration, and what you're doing is engendering competition. And my response was that you can never truly take competition out of a sport. And my lived experience is that football organisations that are doing stuff because they will not come last of any league. And if that is the lever to drive progress, then we'll take it. It's not just because of that. There's so much collaboration in sport as well. And actually within sustainability, so much collaboration behind the scenes, even if there's competition directly on the field of play. So that point
100%.
about competition is critical.
I definitely agree. And I think it's, it's kind of a false dichotomy that collaboration and competition are two different things. I think I'm super into trail running, and it's so interesting always to, hear about the top women, especially. I was just listening to the Free Trail podcast, which I love, about the Black Canyon race, and the top women had such an interesting dialogue amongst themselves about how fun it was to compete with each other and how much it made them all better. And to me, that's a perfect example of the collaboration between those top racers is what made them all faster and, led to the win. So I think collaboration and competition must go together.
Yeah. And we see all the time, don't we? We see teams, compete viciously on the field of play, and then after one, they hug and they do interviews together and they chat. You can differentiate as well.
Absolutely.
So I love that.
Yeah.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for joining us, Kate Williams, CEO of 1% for the Planet, on the Climate of Sport podcast. And tell us where people can find out more information about the organisation.
Absolutely. So 1%fortheplanet.org, all spelled out in letters. And then I'm also happy to have people connect with me on LinkedIn at Kate Williams, and I actually do respond to messages.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
That is a wrap on this episode of The Climate of Sport. If this got you thinking, send it to the group chat, send it to your team or someone who cares about the future of the game. Follow, subscribe, and join us next time, because the biggest wins aren't just on the scoreboard, they're out there for the planet too. See you on the next one.